درود دوستان، وقتتون بخیر. امیدوارم که حالتون خوب باشه. مهمون امروز ما کسی نیست جز شخصیت جذاب و دوست داشتنی بنجامین کوئن. بن رو همتون خیلی خوب میشناسید و توی این 5 سال گذشته باش کلی مطلب یاد گرفتیم. Hello Ben, I just introduced you to the community. They know you very well and it is my pleasure to meet you in person.
It's good to meet you as well. My first time in Amsterdam, actually.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
How do you find Amsterdam?
I really like it. I've only been in Europe once before, actually, and I was in Vienna and Prague, so now I've gotten to see another part of Europe.
Oh, Europe.
I was supposed to go to Greece in 2020, but then the pandemic happened, so I was not able to go. But yeah, I love it so far.
Okay, good. It's good to meet you in person and to be in Amsterdam. Okay, many of people, they didn't listen to you carefully and they invest on altcoin, unfortunately. But as you said, they experience whatever you said it's not good to experience, but they did. What do you think about the alt season? I know your video with many influencer, you talk about this one, but I would like to hear in person what is the idea and what is your opinion basically about the alt season if it's not going to happen?
That's a good question. So normally there's what's called an alt season every cycle, where essentially like Bitcoin dominance crashes as Bitcoin's price is going sideways. And the reason why it crashes is because altcoins are just kind of going crazy to the upside, right? Where they're going up like several 100% a week. But what's different about like this cycle, at least so far, and most cycles, is that this cycle, we haven't seen that. You know, there have been select altcoins that have done very, very well. But if you think about it, if you go through the years, like the altcoins that did well were always different. So like in 2023, it was Solana did really well. Near the end of 2024, we saw XRP doing kind of well. This year, we saw BNB doing well. And then more recently, we've seen Zcash do pretty well. So it's kind of like, because there's a few altcoins that keep doing well, it makes people think that the entire altcoin market at some point is going to catch up to Bitcoin, and then it just keeps on not happening. And so I think if you look at it through the lens of monetary policy, we know last cycle altcoins did not see a surge against Bitcoin until after quantitative tightening was over. The problem is that when QT ended, alt season did not immediately begin. It happened like a year and a half later. The reason why this cycle is so interesting, especially from like an academic perspective, even for someone, if you're not even invested in altcoins, interesting to figure out what's going to happen, is because quantitative tightening this cycle isn't going to end until December of next month, of 2025, whereas in the last cycle, it ended in August, September of the pre-halving year of 2019. So then it has us like wondering like, all right, well, when QT ends in December, is there going to be like a rotation over to altcoins, or is there not? And so my thought about it is this, right? Like I think this is the way to go about it, so that you're not just like taking on a ton of risk. Is that, and it kind of goes back to my favorite topic, Bitcoin dominance, right? In my opinion, of course I could be wrong, but in my opinion, the only way you get an alt season is if Bitcoin were to go parabolic first from here, right? So if the cycle top is in and next year is a bear market and like we don't have any further upside, then there would not be an all season this cycle, because there's just not enough. There's just no retail interest right now. You know, and I track retail interest, I track social sentiment. No one's really here. And so when no one's here, Bitcoin dominance tends to go higher because there's an ever expanding pool of altcoins, and then people just kind of eventually find their way over to Bitcoin. So the way I would say is if you hold anything in crypto, it's still best to hold Bitcoin right now. If Bitcoin does have a crazy rally to end the year, then there could be an argument after QT is over, there could be an argument for a rotation into other coins. Even if there is, it would only last a couple of months, but it could happen. The problem is we don't know if that rally is going to come by Bitcoin or not. And what this phase looks like to me the most is 2019, where it was a Bitcoin only rally, right? And it's just the only difference is this time it lasted like 3 years, whereas in 2019 it lasted like 6 months. It's because monetary policy stayed a lot tighter for a lot longer this cycle. So that's how I'm playing it, right? I would still stick mostly with just Bitcoin for now. If you see a rally by Bitcoin into the end of the year or into say early to mid December, then it could justify like a small rotation, like a rotation. But if you don't get that and Bitcoin keeps doing what it's doing, where it keeps like hovering right around 100K, if in a few weeks Bitcoin is still at 100K and alts are 20% lower on their Bitcoin pairs, then at that point there's probably a good chance you won't have an alt season this cycle. And then the downturn we had in 2019 after QT ended could just be kind of like the 2026 bear market. It's just taking place over a much grander time period. And then perhaps it would set up for perhaps a period where alts outperform in 2027 or 2028. I think, and feel free to stop me if I'm rambling too much.
No, sorry.
But I do think in May of 2026, the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, is likely going to be replaced by someone who's a lot more dovish, and that would be more accommodative to riskier assets like altcoins.
Okay.
But for the last few years, Powell has been very hawkish and higher for longer interest rates, quantitative tightening, which has not been a great environment for for most of the crypto space, which is why this has been a great cycle to just be a Bitcoin maxi, because Bitcoin has done basically the best. It's given you exposure to the upside, but it's also minimized your downside risk. Even a few weeks ago in October, we saw Bitcoin drop 5 or 10%. There were some altcoins down like 80%. 80%, exactly. So it's one of those things where like, for all season to happen, Bitcoin has to do something very specific first. And if that specific thing does not happen, then there's not going to be an alt season this cycle. But I could see the cycles kind of rotate. Like this cycle and also kind of like 2017 cycle, being a Bitcoin maxi was like a great way to go.
Exactly.
Last cycle, 2021, having exposure to other things was also a great way to make money. So I do wonder, maybe we're going to rotate and the next cycle, Bitcoin dominance might end up topping out a lot sooner in the cycle than later on. But I mean, like right now, it's more so we have to see what Bitcoin's going to do. If Bitcoin can rally one more time and then QT ends, you might get that rotation. If the top is in and there's not another rally ahead of us and Bitcoin's still trading at around 100K in 4 to 5 weeks, there's just a good chance we don't have it this cycle and we wait until the next cycle to see it.
Okay, then in this scenario, many people, they ask, do really people have a confidence to invest on crypto for the next cycle if we do not get any alt season this cycle? Still they trust on crypto and blockchain?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of it more so depends on monetary policy and interest rates and inflation and unemployment and all that kind of stuff. I think a lot of people this cycle though become somewhat disenfranchised with the altcoin market just because a lot of projects in the space. I mean, I guess if you take the Bitcoin maxi view, then everything besides Bitcoin is not worth anything, right? But if you're a little bit more flexible and you want to believe that there are projects that are trying to do something important, a lot of those projects have not really seen capital flow into them because a lot of the capital has been sort of geared more towards like the meme coins and that kind of stuff this cycle. So if you think about it, if you're a developer, do you spin your wheels grinding in the crypto space for 4 years just to see some meme coin outperform your entire return on a Tuesday afternoon, right? So I think a lot of developers have left the crypto space and and maybe gone over to AI and some other areas where maybe they felt like their skills were more appreciated. So I think one way to get sentiment back on track in the crypto space is for this like malinvestment of capital to end and for people to try to reward people that are actually building something and not reward people that are just launching meme coins every other day trying to like get rich that way. So I think that's one way that you could see sentiment come back on the right side, But I mean it's a growing process and it takes a lot of maturing for the asset class as a whole.
One of the chart, if we focus on that, is this total 2 or total, let's say total 3 or others. there is a huge divergence between the structure of the others and total tree and the like a Polkadot, like the other crypto,
Right.
which they are in one of the lowest cycle, and that chart is others and total tree in the like a printing and almost a new all-time high.
Right.
What is the reason behind we see the entire of the others and the total trees printing a high, but many altcoins they cannot follow the same procedure?
It's because a lot of it's the reason why the total market cap of altcoins is able to put on a new high, but like a lot of individual ones are not.
No, I mean not. Yeah, total of the altcoins, not like a total and total tree, because over there we can see the Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Right. Yeah.
I'm talking about the others.
Total three and others. Yeah,
exactly.
It's because like a lot of the old altcoins from prior cycles just die out. Mm-hmm. They don't ever come back, and so the way the market cap goes higher, while you see a lot of altcoins just going to zero, is because there's just new altcoins created, and that's what happens every cycle. Is that like people buy altcoins thinking they're all going to return to all-time highs. But the altcoin market could go to all-time highs, and it has, but it's left out a lot of the relics from prior cycles. And so that's what makes altcoins a difficult long-term investment, is because, you know, the altcoin that was popular in cycle 1 is probably not the same one that's popular in cycle 2 and cycle 3 and so on and so forth. For instance, I mean, in 2021, we saw a lot of different cryptocurrencies that basically never recovered. I mean, even Luna, right, went to basically zero, and that was a very popular one back then. The cycle before that, we saw a lot of cryptocurrencies like Dash, what were some of the other ones? There was IOTA, right? There's a lot of different cryptocurrencies back then.
Like ICX, Icon, and Neo, and
Neo, EOS.
EOS.
I mean, that had one of the biggest ICOs ever, billions.
Exactly, billions.
Yeah. And so, like, a lot of those, and even before that, right? If you go before 2017, if you go back to 2013, we were actually, in 2013, it was more so like meme coins, like WorldCoin, and I mean, I remember BBQ coin. There's a lot of like different stuff. So it just shows you that, like, from one cycle to another, the altcoin market cap can go higher based on new altcoins coming into the space, not always the old altcoins rallying to new all-time highs. So there's some that have rallied to new all-time highs.
Yeah.
Solana hit an all-time high, Ethereum hit an all-time high, BNB hit an all-time high, but a lot of them are not. And I mean, again, a lot of them don't really contribute that much to the total market cap, right? Mm-hmm. If you think about the grand scheme of like Polkadot or Avalanche or, you know, Dash or whatever, you know, whatever you're looking at, a lot of them could go up a lot, but they're not necessarily going to, even if they were to go up a lot, it's not necessarily going to have a huge impact on the overall market cap just because they're so small relative. Like, a lot of them are relatively small compared to Ethereum's market cap. And Ethereum is small compared to Bitcoin's market cap. So, like, yeah, if some of these coins, even if they were to double up, it's still not going to have a huge effect.
Yeah. If I want to see from the lens of the company, I see this like a Cardano Foundation or Polkadot Foundation. They are settled themselves like a company, like a software company. They are going after licensing, registering themselves, and they introduce themselves like we are established company. And as I know, one of the validator on Cardano is from you're into the cryptoverse. And I think because you know the charts and you follow the perspective of the academia, what do you think from this kind of foundation, like a Cardano Foundation? They have a huge company across the world, and what will happen for them?
I mean, I guess it depends on if they're able to not become a relic or not. If the token, if it can survive from one cycle to another. For instance, if you look at the Bitcoin valuation of ADA, it's really low, right? Like it's like 500 Satoshis or something. In prior cycles, we saw it bottom out between like 200 to 400 Satoshis. So it's getting pretty close to like where you would want to see it find a low if it's going to. But I mean, one of the things that kind of kept me away from a lot of these tokens this cycle was more so just monetary policy, right? And a lot of them, you could argue that if you're running a business, you can control what goes on in the four walls of your business, but you can't control what goes on outside of it, right? You know, you could have an altcoin doing all sorts of great things potentially by what the industry would consider, you know, to be successful. But if monetary policy isn't there to sort of, you know, to sort of be accommodative for it, it is a riskier asset class. Like we know that. Like crypto is basically as far up the risk curve as you can go in a lot of different ways of thinking. So I think that the argument with it is like, what's going to happen to the Bitcoin valuation of ADA after quantitative tightening ends? Because the last cycle, when QT ended, that's when ADA bottomed against Bitcoin.
Exactly.
And that's going to happen in December. Yeah. So, I think a lot of it kind of hinges on what it does there. A lot of altcoins don't find lows against Bitcoin, right? Like Dash just continue to bleed against Bitcoin forever.
Yeah.
EOS continue to bleed against Bitcoin forever. So, whatever altcoins are potentially good investments for future cycles, they need to find lows against Bitcoin that are not lower lows compared to the prior cycle. So that's what I would watch for with ADA over the coming months. It's like, is it actually bottoming out at 400 to 500 sats? Or is it going lower? And if it's going a lot lower, then you sort of justify, you could argue that it might not come back at that point. But it's hard to know at this point. I mean, monetary policy is shifting constantly, and we'll see. I mean, there's going to be a big change next month. We'll likely have another rate cut, and we'll likely see quantitative tightening come to an end. So, who knows?
Okay. For the last question, if on October we saw the top of the cycle, what is the expectation for the bottom?
Usually it's about a year,
wise?
right? Well, usually it's about a year later.
Yeah, of course.
So if the top's already in, normally you see 70 to 80% drops by Bitcoin. But also those 70 to 80% drops normally happen after euphoria, and we haven't really seen that either.
Exactly.
So I could see a scenario where it's kind of like a repeat of 2019 without the pandemic, where it's like a 50% drop from the high. Which if that's the case, then it would put Bitcoin back between like 60 to 70K as a potential low. And you could argue that. And that's also where the 200-week SMA is the 200-week moving average is going to. Normally, Bitcoin goes to the 200-week moving average in midterm years. So I would say like 60 to 70K is kind of like a realistic, it could go lower. Maybe it doesn't go quite that low, but it's kind of a good middle ground where it's basically where the prior all-time high was. It's a little higher than the ETF launch day, like 48K or whatever it was at. So I would say that, and I would also say like the two most likely times for a bottom, I would say the most likely is just 1 year later, so October of 2026, if that's the top. If we have another rally into December, then the top, I would say, or the bottom would just be December of 2026. But if the top's already in, then you would say October 2026. I could see a scenario where it could come earlier, like it could come in the summer. Especially if the chair of the Fed, Jerome Powell, is replaced by someone who just cuts interest. They cut interest rates a lot. You might see it bottom out sooner. Last cycle we saw Ethereum bottom out in June. Exactly. So it's not like it's impossible. To it could be a sense of like by the time people even accept that we're in a bear market in early 2026, the bear market could be more than halfway over. And that's kind of what happened in 2022. Is like by the time people are willing to accept it, it's usually almost coming to an end. In fact, there's a popular chart that people have talked about a lot, like Bitcoin overlaid with M2, the money supply. And usually by the time M2 tops, like a lot of people think that Bitcoin follows M2, but usually by the time M2 tops, Bitcoin's near the low for the cycle. So I think Bitcoin leads in a lot of ways. It's just not obvious at the time. And then you like look back on it and you're like, oh yeah, like it kind of led all that. And
Okay. Thank you so much for your
thanks for
time.
having me.
It was a pleasure to talk to you in person. And if you want to add anything to the audience for if they want to invest on Bitcoin for the next cycle or they still believe altcoin can outperform, for your final words, what do you have?
I would say just in general, value your portfolio in Satoshis, right? Value your portfolio in Satoshis. And that's the way to be successful in crypto, right? If you buy an altcoin and it's bleeding against Bitcoin, that's not a good thing. So if you are buying an altcoin, you need to find ones that are actually being constructive against Bitcoin. And I think if you can do that, then if you can value your portfolio in Satoshis, then you'll be successful.
Okay. Thank you so much
for
your time. Thank you.